on a pace to end well. And she says, I understand. He says, no, you don't understand. His organs are shutting down. She said, I understand. But 5 minutes ago, we didn't have a pulse. And now we have a pulse. So what are we going to do about it? And then he said, well, there's this thing called the ECMO machine. It takes over and oxygenates blood for the entire heart. But it's not a good option. Only about 50% of people who ever make it on that machine end up living. The other problem is that we're at UCLA in Santa Monica, and the ECMO was at UCLA in Westwood, so about 20 minutes away. And they've never taken it off of campus in the history of the hospital. And the other problem is there's only 2 doctors who do this surgery, and neither of them are on today because today is Father's Day. And there's only 4 nurses, and none of them are on. So at the same time, my friend that I had called originally to see if I should go in the hospital, he happened to had a bachelor party in Vegas with the head of surgery at UCLA sitting right next to him. And he said, hey, can you look at my friend? I sent him to the hospital yesterday with a stomach situation. I want to see how he's doing. So the doctor pulled up his, phone, and they can kind of look at the records, and he read through, and they see real time. And he said, your friend's about to die any minute. And so he called a doctor, this guy, this heart surgeon, and he left his Father's Day and he assembled this whole team. And they did this crazy surgery. They hooked me up to this ECMO machine. They transported me over to Westwood. And then they got me there, and they then, as my friend explained, who flew down from Vegas, they did the full court press of steroids and adrenaline. They had a breathing machine. They had the ECMO, and they're hoping to kickstart my heart. And, a normal heart's like boom, 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 boom. But so they'll turn down the ECMO trying to see if they can get mine to work. And they're hoping just for, boom, 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 boom. And they did it. And it was just the faintest flicker. It was barely moving, making no sound. So they were really concerned that I wasn't going to make it. And then, this is almost the end of the story, then they said one of the craziest things they've ever seen happen. My sister flew down from Portland, which is about 2 hours away, and she and I are really close. And my sister's had a difficult journey through life. She's had a lot of struggles. And she and I have this playlist we share called our Inspiration Playlist, which has the cheesiest songs you've ever heard on it, like The Climb by Miley Cyrus and I Am Beautiful by Christina Aguilera, that kind of stuff. And she starts playing the playlist in the room. And my sister has a beautiful voice, and she starts singing along with the songs. And the nurse named Ashley, who looked like she was a Disney character, like a Disney princess, she's the one who told me the story. She started singing with Tracy and my sister, and they were singing and singing. And then, as Ashley explained, Mitch, whose job it was to monitor the ECMO, all of a sudden said, guys, keep singing. His heart is responding. It's almost as if he can hear you. Keep singing. And they just kept singing, and they kept singing. My heart just kept upticking and upticking, upticking. Finally, to the point the next day, they said, his heart is good, and it looks like his heart is in good shape. Let's turn down the sedatives and see how much brain damage he has. And they turned it down, and I kind of came out, and my body had just totally rebooted. I just kind of woke up and said hello. And that was kind of the story. So I can also, I don't know if you guys want to invite questions as we go, or I can talk through what the experience was like trying to come back to the world and what I've learned from it from there.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
Okay. So I think the question people always would ask, and I'm sure this group more than others, is what was the experience like? Did I experience anything during the flatline? What was that like? And do I have any recollection of that? And the answer is I do. It was not the traditional experience that I've seen people talk about on television, where they talk about going slowly towards the light. It was not that. My experience was this. It was almost if any of you guys have ever been scuba diving or snorkeling and you're deep underwater and you're looking up at the surface of the ocean and all you can see is just a little bit of light coming through. It was like that, but the light felt as if it was a universe of time away. It felt impossibly far away. And the water felt like this cosmic energy field where I was myself, not in my body, but I felt my sense of spirit, but I was also everything else. I was everything and nothing, or I was one with all of the water. We were all connected, just like water is. You know, you hear about these quantum entanglements of energy, atoms being hundreds of miles and maybe universes away. It was that. It was just everything was connected. And I remember being able to hear my mom say, Matthew David Polson, you need to fight. You need to fight. And I remember thinking that I didn't feel fear because there was a sense of just comfort in the oneness. And I remember just feeling a sense of liberation, of the singular focus, just saying, I just have to get back to the light. And I also felt like the energy was on my side, like that the energy around me was collaborating with me. And, you know, it was the people that were standing outside that operating room, sending in their love. I had friends who were aware that were holding prayer groups. Anna, the girl who had come for the second date, she's from Argentina. Her family in Argentina was sending in prayers. And I could feel that energy. And I felt the more determined I was to get back, the more that energy was on my side. And I remember just gaining momentum. And then I remember very clearly coming back into the world and looking up and seeing my mom and seeing my dad and just feeling pure joy. You know, just a sense of connection to everything in the world in one moment. So that was that experience. And it's a funny thing because you have an experience like that and it's a lot to process. And you start to wonder, did you really have that experience? Because I remember when I would read or I would hear those people talking about on TV, I was always a little skeptical. Not because I thought people were intentionally not telling the truth. I just thought, well, people want to hear that there's something there, and your mind can get mixed through, and and it's more interesting to say, yeah, I saw the light versus there was nothing. So I started reflective. Did I really remember this in the way that I did? But then we were talking about what it was like to come into the room, and the doctor was talking about how unusual it was for someone to flatline and all of a sudden to wake up and look up and then sit up and make a gesture, and that he'd never seen that before. And I said, well, I didn't just make one gesture. I did this. I lifted both thumbs, and my mom was like, no, you only lifted one. And my dad was in the room. He was like, no, he lifted two. So I remembered, like, I could tell you where everyone was in that moment. And then my friend who came down, the doctor, I saw him not till like for another 2 months after it, and he said, do you remember the first thing that you wrote when you came to? Because I was still intubated, so I couldn't talk yet. And he said, do you remember the first thing you wrote? And I said, I don't. And he said, you had just come up and you wrote on the board. No one had told you what had happened. All you knew is you went into surgery for your stomach. That's all you knew. But the first thing you wrote was, tell my mom that I fought with everything that I had. I was fighting to come back. And then I wrote, and tell our friends. And he's like, and you didn't know that anybody even knew. Tell all of our friends who thought of me, I love them and thank you. So you're just aware of that energy.
By the way, Matt, just for clarification for translators, in case flatline, when Matt said flatline, what he's referring to is that there is no vital signs. So it's technically speaking, he's dead. There's no life. There's no pumping of blood, etc.
Yeah, the flat line was for 4.5 minutes.
Which normally is plenty time to cause all kinds of tissue organ damage and failure. That would be the logical expectation in something like that.
Yeah. Yeah, it was, a month. This is the last story I tell, and then if we can want to talk through things or whatever. But
yes.
People often ask me, like, how does this change the way you look at the world? And it changes everything for me. And it makes you just realize how quickly your mind frame, your mentality can change. Because as Dr. Reed knows, 6 months before this happened, I was in a really depressed place for the first time in my life, and was really struggling in ways that and I even felt bad about how bad I was struggling, how much I hated myself, and how loud the voices had gotten. And now all that goes away. It was a month before this happened. We had hired a new VP of marketing at our company, and we were talking about what we wanted to mean in the world, not just for the money that we raised for people, but how we want to touch people's hearts. And he was driving home that night, and he saw this billboard, and the billboard said, "Optimism breaks barriers." And he sent me a picture of it. And I'd never heard that quote before. And this was like kind of it was a bad little billboard. It was a not impressive billboard. It had a boring organization on it. But I remember seeing the quote. I was like, God, I love that quote. That's so beautiful. And so I said I was going to talk about it at our team meeting. We have 100 people on our team, and I'm going to tell them this is the spirit that we can embody in the world. So I went to look up who said it. And I thought it would be like Nelson Mandela or, Robert Kennedy Jr. or Marianne Williamson. And all I could find was this picture of this crappy billboard with this boring organization on it, and on the side of this small road. And I kept looking, and finally I stood up for the team and said, look, optimism breaks barriers represents the spirit we can imbue in the world. But I can't find who said it, so I'm crediting it to Heinz, who's our VP of marketing, because he's much more interesting than this boring organization. Well, the boring organization was UCLA Health. So when I was in UCLA Hospital 1 month later, and I'm sitting in the hospital bed, or I'm lying in the hospital bed, and the doctor, this guy, Dr. Ye, who was the one who'd done the surgery and who had saved my life, he said to me, I want you to understand something before you leave here. He said, when I finish my career 30 years from now, and he's a world-renowned surgeon, and I talk about the most extraordinary case I've ever seen, this is going to be it. We had you at 0% chance of survival for 2 days. And the fact that we have you going home with your full faculties, we have no medical explanation for that. And I said, well, what is your explanation then? He said, we found your mom very inspiring. When they did the second surgery, the one where the guy had to leave his Father's Day, she was